Is there a limit to population growth? Is there a point beyond which we fall victim of the Malthusian trap, that population growth will exceed our ability to feed everyone and lead to mass starvation and misery? Malthus published this idea almost 220 years ago, and over the years many have adopted it and made doomsday predictions. Paul Ehrlich wrote the bestseller The Population Bomb in 1968, in which he warned of mass starvation of humans in the 1970s and 80s. World Watch Institute founder Lester Brown declared in 1995, humanity's greatest challenge may soon be just making it to the next harvest. And of course the book Limits to Growth, published in 1972, failed to live up to its predictions. More recently, Dick Smith released a video as part of his Fair Go campaign warning of the impending disaster that out-of-control population growth will bring. Now, I describe Dick Smith's claims as scaremongering, juxtaposing images of rapid population growth with malnourished children, famine and death. In a previous video, I produced this chart to show that at the same time that population doubled from 1970 to 2015, the number of people living in extreme poverty fell by more than 2/3. Now, as some people like to do, they assumed that what I meant by this was that rapid population growth caused the reduction in poverty, which is not what I meant at all. I posted this graph to show that to date, the world is a better place for more people than ever, despite rapid population growth. And there are a whole host of other graphs to illustrate the point, such as declining infant mortality rates, a reduction in famines, and rising literacy levels. I think the real reason for the improvement in people's lives over this period is because of the spread of freedom, democracy and capitalism, which brings with it free trade, technological innovation, a more educated population, and the economic empowerment of women. Now, of course, none of these graphs say anything about the future. So let me say what I said in that previous video again, so there is no confusion. Obviously, there are limits to growth. The Earth and its resources are, after all, finite. But what is that limit? At what point does the population become too large? I don't know the answer, but I'm going to suggest, given the trend in current growth rates and the reduction in poverty, famine, and a whole host of other positive indicators, that we shouldn't be overly alarmed about world population growth. So first off, the UN projects the world population will rise to 11.2 billion by the end of the century. That's an increase of approximately 50% or 3.8 billion from 2015 levels over 85 years. Remember that it took just 45 years from 1970 to 2015 to add about the same amount of people. So if it's going to take almost twice as long to add the same amount of people as it did between 1970 and 2015, then obviously the rate of population growth is projected to slow. And that's exactly what the red line shows. Now, to preempt the barrage of comments from conspiracy theorists about how the UN is part of the globalist elite peddling falsehoods to further their globalist agenda, note that the site from which this data is drawn from shows in detail how the projections are made and also demonstrates that the UN has a good track record with accuracy going back to the 1950s for predicting population growth. So population growth is not speeding up, it's slowing down. In fact, the rate of growth has been slowing since it peaked in the 1960s and is headed towards zero by the end of the century. But of course, growth rates are not evenly distributed. Most of the developed world have population growth rates of less than 1% today, whilst parts of Africa are in excess of 3%. But a consistent finding is that as societies become more wealthy, their population growth declines. So as long as the spread of democracy, freedom, capitalism, free trade and all those goodies continue, and there's no reason to think it won't, population growth rates will continue to come down, and with it, poverty. This graph shows the percentage of the world's population living in extreme poverty with a projection out to 2030, at which time the world population is projected to be approximately 8.5 billion. As you can see, the percentage of those living in extreme poverty is set to fall below 5%. Now, what happens after 2030? Is there a tipping point somewhere between 2030 and the end of the century? Who can know? But I think the burden of proof is on the doom and gloomers to provide evidence as to why that will be the case, why the trends of increasing global prosperity and declining population growth will change. Obviously, there are other factors that can change the picture, both known and unknown. Climate change, breakouts of war, new diseases, just to name a few. There's also the issue of inequality. This chart gives a range of outcomes of poverty levels given changes in inequality. Even on the worst case scenario where most of the gains go to the top, overall poverty still comes down. Now, it's not my intention to address the issue of income inequality here. I'm just going to stick with population growth for now, but perhaps if there's enough people interested, I can do another video on income inequality later. Also, in the case of Australia, I do think we should look at reducing the rate of immigration, especially into our two largest cities of Sydney and Melbourne, to help relieve stress on infrastructure, general amenity, and the cost of living. So to conclude, I believe that the adverse effects of population growth are overstated by some given the current trends and future forecasts from reputable sources. And as I said previously, I think the burden of proof is on those that predict disaster to come up with good evidence-based arguments why they think that, rather than overhyped scare campaigns. So, do you believe that the human race is fated to fall victim to the Malthusian trap, or can we avoid it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.